All right. Hello, everybody. Today I am starting the documentation process for a new video game I'm going to be working on. Now, I've worked on some games before, and to be honest, I really struggle to finish them because, I've done a couple game jams, and at a certain point, it's like I'm tired of making someone else's game or games by someone else's rules to fit into a certain category. And I feel like, I'm always forcing something rather than making something that I truly enjoy. And I reach a point where I feel confident that I can, at the very least, learn what I need to learn to do the things I need to do. And so I'm just gonna just jump into it. I've decided I'm gonna start working on maybe not necessarily my dream game, but a game of a much bigger scope. And I've already finished a game design document, and I'm gonna go through it and just give a brief overview of my ideas. And of course, this is still a work in progress, something we still have to narrow down on. But I do think some of it is a little concrete. And we're just going to hop right into it. So, my idea is essentially a game where you're going to command units in squads in a battle. I want you to fight alongside your squads, very similar to Mountain Blade. But one of my problems, and I love Mountain Blade, it's pretty close to being one of my dream games, and maybe I'm just very petty. I'm just not a fan of the lack of balance. It seems to me like they create this huge empty world with not a lot to do, and then the aspects of the game that are actually important, like the balance and the strategy and managing your troops, is just not there. And I've spent so much time trying to mod and failing to mod the game to make it work the way I want it to work. I'm just sitting here like, you know what? Maybe I could just write my own game in that time frame. Now, obviously, the scope is going to have to be limited. I'm not going to be making, a full-fledged uh, third-person RPG, but there are going to be elements of it. So, uh, I'll just jump into the overview. This game is going to be a turn-based hex grand strategy game with RTS Battle Simulator. The player will control armies, recruit and equip units, promote generals and captains, and then take them into battle against opposing lords. So essentially, my idea is to have a hex-based map where you can navigate your armies, and then when you touch another army, it's going to change the scene to a local battle where you can then take the troops that you've assigned into squads and then command them like, okay, I want this squad to go here, I want this squad to go there, and depending on the leadership value of the squads, I want them to unlock like more formations and whatnot. So we're not going to be going crazy into like animations. Like the animations I'm thinking are just going to be very simple swinging attacks. Again, I have to keep this scope very, very limited because it's a big idea, and I have to do what I can do to keep it within the context of what I can do. The target audience is going to be fans of grand strategy, real time strategy, build crafting, unit management, essentially young men, young to middle aged men who are in those types of games. The game is going to be single player, offline game, but I'm open to adding multiplayer, even if it's just like when you're going into a battle, allowing someone else to control another player. So I want to have some kind of multiplayer at some point if possible, but I understand that that opens a whole can of worms. So that's more of like a long term, would be nice kind of thing, but it's not in the vision right now. The genre, as I said, we're going to be using a hex map, and then like a battle simulator. The game flow. The player is going to maneuver an army through a hex-based map, collecting resources, recruiting and training units, promoting captains, generals, and attacking opposing armies and fortresses. When a player attacks opposing army, the game goes into a more RTS style where army composition matters. And that's a really big thing that I think is lacking in a lot of other games is army composition doesn't matter, at least in terms of like what types of units you have. It's usually like, here are the most OP units, spam them out. Take the original Mountain Blade, for example. Swadian Knights are overpowered. You can win the entire game with like 20 Swadian Knights, and actually trying to build a balanced army is not optimal. I don't like seeing strategy games where cavalry can charge head first into a line of spearmen that are in like a shield wall, and then like the cavalry comes out on top. That's not how it works. I want to see a balance, a sort of like rock paper scissors, where you have to actually command your cavalry to attack like soft uh, stragglers or soft units like archers. archers are going to, like, shoot at spearmen, and then spearmen are going to counter cavalry. And I actually want to make spears useful. One of my biggest pet peeves is a lot of games spears are just so overlooked. But historically speaking, the spear is like one of the most overpowered weapons of history because it's simple, cheap, long, can stop cavalry. That's like one of my biggest influences. I want to actually command troops and sort of simulate a real battle in a way that I think games like Mount & Blade have come close, but then just miss the mark. So the project scope, it's going to be a full-fledged strategy game that can be played in campaigns. The units will all be unique with random names, stats, and traits. The player should be able to assign these units to squads and promote a captain for every squad. These units will battle in RTS mode to determine the winner of a battle, and these battles will change the tide of war. So essentially, my idea is we're going to have squads. I'll probably map them to the keyboard 1 through 0. And then as your like leadership skill increases, you can unlock more squads. And then how big those squads are is going to be dependent on the leadership skill of the squad leader. And there's going to be a big emphasis on build crafting your army. I want to have random traits, so you have like some positive traits and negative traits for every like random unit you come across. And so like each squad will have a certain feel to it. So maybe this squad will have certain advantages or disadvantages because of the traits that the people have. And then you can have certain units that you fall in love with and then promote them to captain. They have good leadership skill, then the squad will get bigger, and there's going to be some other benefits to the leadership skill as well. Story and setting. So I will likely make a story similar to like an old like JRPG where like you are I guess like the son of somebody who died, and maybe you're a baron. I want you to start with some level of power, and then from there you learn the ropes of how to manage an army and then progress. Maybe have some sort of advisor or something. Nothing is locked down in the story right now, but that is something that once I have a working prototype and I'm happy with it, I'm going to start discussing that and see where we come up with. So the game is going to be set in a fictional world based off of Western fantasy. There will be a realistic and gritty tone with moments of lightheartedness and charm. The story of the game is going to be determined by the players and the choices that they make, whether you're going to attack lords, sack castles, form alliances. I really want player agency to be important. There may be an overarching story in like a main campaign mode, but again, that's more of like a stretch goal that's not important. What's really important is I get a working prototype, and I have to make sure I keep the scope very limited. And essentially, I'm basing this off of kind of like the old JRPG feel. I really love the way that when you play those old JRPGs, they have great feel. That even the graphics, like the characters, the way they're drawn, the way the world is drawn, it's very memorable. And I want to take a Western, modern interpretation of that style. So core mechanics. Order and morale are going to be key mechanics that set the game apart from others in the genre. Each squad will have a morale stat that determines an individual unit's likelihood of retreat or breaking formation. Both overly low or high stat or morale stat will have consequences. Order will be a stat, which is based off of a character's leadership, based on their general and captain's leadership ability. The more leadership these characters have, the higher the order of each squad under them, and this in turn will act as a buffer against the negative effects of morale. So essentially, I'm thinking of having like a bar, and the bar is going to be like red on one side, and then like kind of like yellow for like low but not too low. Then it's going to be the other side is going to be like green for like good morale, and then above that is going to be red again because I want to have consequences if your morale is too high. So the idea is if your leadership ability is going to put a center on that bar, like a gray like center with like a shield or something, and it'll like stretch out the good parts of the bar depending on the leadership ability, like it'll increase by a certain percentage. So essentially, if the morale of the squad is low and then somebody dies or something negative happens, it's going to create a trigger point, and that will cause units to retreat, or there may be some other bad effects that could happen from that. If the morale is too high, I also want that to be negative as well to a degree. Maybe units will start breaking formation and chasing down troops, which could be a really bad thing. So a high leadership skill in the squad is going to be important because it's going to act as a buffer against those things from happening. And then it also creates consequences. Like if your squad leader dies and that buffer disappears, the combination of low morale and losing a squad leader could mean like boom, boom, boom. People start retreating, and retreating might be a trigger point for other people to retreat, and then your whole squad can fall apart. So I really want morale and order to be these two huge stats that have a major effect on battle, and it's important not to let your squads get into low morale. Far too often I see games where they'll have a morale meter, right? Because I'm not doing anything new. Like morale exists in games, but oftentimes it has like no effect or very little effect. In many games, it's just sort of a measure of who's winning. You look at the morale meter and you're like, oh, morale's good. I must be winning the war. But it doesn't actually impact the battle all that much. So I want it to matter. If your morale goes down, your troops might retreat. You might lose a fight that you might have otherwise won because your morale is low. Okay, the camera view. It's going to be an overhead camera of the map. In RTS, it's still going to be overhead, but if I can make a third-person mode where you fight alongside your troops, I would like to do that. That's kind of like, it's not exactly a stretch goal. It's something I want to do, but it's a matter of whether or not I can implement it. At the very least, the game's going to work like an RTS, but if I can make it an RTS where you can command your troops from that third-person action point of view, I would really love to do that. Player's objective is to collect resources, recruit and train units. A lot of this is kind of like a repeat. Actually, I'm going to go down the bottom here. This was a step-by-step game design document, like template that I got from AKM Design. I don't know. I like it. It pops into Notion, and it made it easy for me to like ask me the questions to figure out exactly what we're going to work through, and it helped me like come up with a more fully fledged idea. Let's find where I was. Okay, camera view. All right. Trading and resource management, diplomacy. I would like to make those features again, but again, those are like secondary. The main thing is, can you manage an army? Can you promote units? That's the core gameplay, is really build crafting and fighting with an army. The game progression. The player is going to progress in multiple ways. They will level up their own character as well as the individual characters in their army, unlocking new formations and strategies as the game goes on. The player will also be able to capture locations in-game and produce resources that add to the sim experience of the game. As the player gains more power, they should always be discovering and unlocking new features to play with. Build crafting of the army will be a major factor of the game, as I said, which gives the player a lot of freedom to tweak and improve the army as the game goes on. So I really want to have this feel of constantly unlocking something new. Your leadership ability goes up, you get more formations, you get more squads. Like maybe at the beginning of the game, you don't have any squads. You just have you and your squad, and that's going to be like one on the keyboard. But as your leadership ability increases, you can have more squads. You can start to promote squad leaders, and who knows, maybe even promote generals who can run their own armies and have their own squads. And again, it's going to come back to that very important stat of leadership. The more leadership you have on your character, the more tools you're going to have to play with. And I really want this sense of constant progression. You get a new castle, now you can put somebody in charge of the castle. You've unlocked more leadership, so you get more squads. Your squad leader gets promoted, so now he gets more men. Always feeling like you're unlocking something. Always feeling like there's something new you can do to make your army better. The player's journey is going to consist of 2 stages. It's going to be a grand strategy game. Don't know if I'm using that term right, but whatever. Where the player manages a kingdom, and a battle sim where the player commands his armies. Whoops, got interrupted there. Anyways, back to it. So one thing that I think is going to be really important is when looking at the scope, I don't want to go too crazy into the sim side of things because we're not trying to make Civilization. I don't want to get too crazy into the third-person action because it's not going to be a third-person action RPG with smooth animations. I don't have a full team. I'm just going to take the aspects of each of these styles that make sense towards what's important, which is the build crafting of the army, the managing of strategy, and being able to run alongside your troops and fight with some very simple animations would be a nice touch. But we had to be very careful not to get too crazy out of scope. We're not trying to create Civilization. We're not trying to create Mountain Blade. We're trying to create something different. There are certain aspects that I might pick from these games. For example, having the hex-based grid. But I'm not trying to go crazy into having a bunch of diplomacy features and all this extra stuff. Any of those types of features that I put in are going to have to be kept very limited in scope. Anything that doesn't directly support the real gameplay loop, which is building your army, taking that army into fights, making your army stronger, is not going to be beneficial. So I have to ask with every single mechanic that I decide to put in, is this going to contribute to the core gameplay loop? And if it's not, then as much as I might like that mechanic, it's got to be thrown out. The game is meant to be played in turns as you manage a country on a grand scale. Again, in a grand scale, but limited scope. The game will have a just one more turn mentality as the player is always getting more powerful, unlocking new ways to manage their army, and the players will always be taking new fortresses, building farmsteads, training and leveling up units, customizing their army, etc. Player rewards. The player is going to receive consistent rewards to keep the game fresh. Units will unlock new abilities, squads, formations. The players level up. They can create new squads, essentially rehashing some of the things I've already said. Penalties. Penalties for failure are going to be harsh. Towns that are lost will provide resources to enemies and will need to be retaken. Units that die will be lost permanently, no matter how much the player might love them. A loss of morale can cripple the army, and the death of a captain and a sudden shift of morale can lead to a cascading effect of retreat, effectively routing the unit with which was once the pride of your army. Like I mentioned before, I think consequences are important. If you can't really love a character if you can't run the risk of losing that character. I want the player to feel a sense of loss. If a character dies, it's, oh no, I can't believe that character died. I want people to get connected to all of these unique units, and then if they lose them, there's an actual consequence, rather than just them, going back to base and then having like half health or something. There will be consequences for failure, and there will be rewards for success. Mechanics. In the world map, the player is going to recruit individual units which can be trained into roles and equipped with gear. The players manage their army and promote units to higher office to oversee squads. The army will require food and pay in order to maintain good morale. I think that would be a pretty simple system because I want to have some kind of economic system, but we can't go too crazy. So I'm thinking keeping it simple to two resources, food and morale. Any one of those gets too low, food and pay. And then if those resources get too low, then the morale is going to be affected, and there might be some other effects. Maybe like if you're low on food, your units are going to go into fight with like less health or something like that. Both food and money can be acquired from owning flephs. So my idea is essentially you're going to have that town, which is going to be on a hex grid, and you can essentially build around the town on the grid around it to get like maybe mines or farms, and that'll provide whatever resources that you might require to maintain your army. So the more towns that you take, the more resources and a bigger army that you can support. Art and design. So I made a mood board here. None of this is my work. It's just pictures from different video games to give a general idea of what the game should look or feel like. The game is going to feature a modern interpretation of classic JRPG titles, with simple, blocky menus, descriptive yet concise text to show details which will be pertinent to the player. The overhead map is going to feature a bright and colorful world, which is contrasted with gritty menu blocks that heavily use darker brown textures. Character models will not initially be unique, but rather characters will be separated by character portraits, which will display more Western twist on the Japanese style. I'm still kind of debating on how that's going to work, because if I do 3D, does it make sense to have a portrait and then like show your 3D character? Is there, should I make like the 3D model look like the portrait? These are still questions that are running in my head. But I'm really leaning towards portraits. Stat blocks are going to be simple and should fit on a single page where the player can see immediate changes as they put on your gear. I want it to be very, very simple. You put gear on, stats go up. Maybe like as you click the gear, it'll show it in green if the stat goes up, red if the stat goes down. And there really isn't going to be that much gear in the game anyways, because I got to keep the scope limited. I don't want to have like a bunch of 10,000 different armors and weapons that I have to go through and balance. I'm thinking it would be very simple as like the gear is just going to be like a tiered system. Cloth, leather, chain, plate, and what the real prohibitive thing that prevents you from giving your entire army plate is going to be that it's going to be expensive. So, sort of like mimicking history, a good chunk of your army is probably going to be given chain and spears, or chain and bows, keeping the cost down, because historically speaking, no army was going to be equipped with the best gear in its entirety. It's like if you had one captain or general you really like, he's going to have the better gear. So that's going to be kind of like the limiting factor. So if you do play long enough to get most of your army good gear, that it's not going to be about like unlocking legendary gear, but more about making sure that the whole army is well equipped based on what you need. Same thing. I'm not going to create 1,000 different spears. It's going to be like, is your character going to have a spear? Are they going to have a mace? Are they going to have a sword? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of each? So like if you're fighting guys in plate, maybe a mace or a hammer is going to like bypass armor or something like that. So it's not going to be like legendary armor. It's not going to be like crazy on the stats. Units are going to get somewhat stronger, but I'm not thinking it's going to be like a runaway Dragon Ball Z power leveling. I'm trying to avoid that and try to keep it when you can't spell. Did I really like misspell all this stuff? Well, that's just not caps. Jeez. Normally I'm much better. Okay. There should be a seamless transition between individual units and squads so the player can smoothly navigate the game without having to dig through random menu options. Terrible menus is one of my biggest pet peeve of modern games. Lack of context clues, like having to like navigate with like different random triggers on the controller, menus. You ever looking for an option and it's hidden in some random menu? Like there's 17 sub-menus and you can never find what you're looking for. I want to keep it very simple. Army management, you could see your captains or you can see the squad. You click the squad, you can see the captains and all the other units in it. Boom. And it's right there. Easy to find. No reason you should have 10 different menus. And then this is kind of like the theme I'm going for, right? So we have the hex grid style. This is like maybe more of a mature looking theme than what I'm going for. Like again, JRPG or that like Japanese style is a little bit more lighthearted outside of battle. But again, we're getting into these like blocky texts, very simple stat blocks where you can see what's going on. A lot of these games I haven't even played, but I can look at them and go, yeah, I know what's going on there, right? It's very clear. Magic defense, I know what that does. And that's something that's very important for me, is having those context clues. So this is a general idea of the mood of the game. I'm not going to play this because it would be copyrighted. I do have some music that I have the right to use, but I'm not on like YouTube. So, but again, JRPG kind of lighthearted. Thinking like classical guitar in battle, heavy use on drums. The target hardware. I don't have specific target hardware. I just want to make the game that I want to make, and if the hardware makes the cut, it makes the cut. I'm not going to write for old hardware specifically. I'm going to do my best to optimize, but I'm going to make the game that I'm going to make. So if that means that older hardware is not good enough, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. I'm really going to be focusing on PC because I really think optimizing it to work on PC and well on PC, doing one thing right is important, right? Instead of trying to do 15 different things and then making a mess, I just want to make it for PC. And if you want to port it down the road, that's a whole other discussion to be had. Development hardware, right now I'm doing it on Mac, but I really want to keep things as not open source, but multi-platform as possible. I want to keep that compatibility if I can. I plan to write it in Godot because I'm familiar with Godot, and let's be honest, these days it doesn't really matter what game engine you use. It's what you're familiar with. Some, Unreal might give me some more tools, but then I have to go and learn Unreal, and I'd rather just start the project and start working. Blender, GIMP, and Audacity. Simple, free tools. I'm not going to be doing a bunch of crazy stuff. Very simple animations. I'm not going to go pay for, specialized animation software so that I can create like 3 animations for the fight. So we're going to keep that stuff as simple as possible. If I need some models, I'll probably just buy some 3D models. The whole game is going to be written in GDScript and C Sharp. I will likely use GDScript for the majority of it, but C Sharp is going to be used if we get to something that's going to be harder to optimize and we really need to get as close to machine code as possible. I'm going to be using Git. I'm not going to go too crazy into all of this or my coding standards. I don't really plan on using libraries, but I'm open-minded to it. Marketing. This is something. So the target demographic is essentially going to be young to middle-aged men, right? The type of people who like history, who like these kind of like strategy games. Competitor market analysis. We've got Civilization, Mount & Blade, Total War, tons of other games in the genre, but these are the ones that come to mind. I'm going to differentiate the game not by trying to do what they do better or to do something completely different either, but rather take elements from those games that I think are going to be useful, throwing away what I don't like, and just trying to improve upon what I do use. I want to take the wheel that's already been invented and just find a different way to use it, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to respectfully borrow the ideas that I believe work, building on them in new ways. We will aim for a simple yet fleshed out experience rather than a large, mostly empty, grindy sandbox, while giving the player the maximum amount of control over the things that actually matter. For example, trading should be simple and fun, which allows the player to see money rolling in for good decisions, not micromanaging caravans and spending hours guiding cows across the map. Players should feel like a king, not an errand boy. This is one of my pet peeves, again, going back with like Mount & Blade. Again, love the game, but I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours and hours doing quests for every random town and then guiding cows across the map so that I can build up enough reputation with the towns that I can actually recruit enough troops to play the game. It's BS that wastes time. It's like a time filler. Like, that's all it is. I'm not enjoying the game at that point. I'm just like going through the motions until I can finally enjoy the game. That to me is not a good game design decision. Pricing, I don't really have a price in mind because I don't really know what it's going to look like, how long it's going to take. I've given myself 2 years for the project, but that is going to be adjusted as needed. But one thing is going to be clear is I'm going to start with a fixed fee to play the game as is with free updates and bug fixes. I might do DLC, but my rule is that any DLC has to be created after the game has been completed, and there will be no loot boxes, microtransactions, or any predatory practices. I'm not a fan of that stuff. Future opportunities, essentially, am I going to be using sales? And yes, I'm going to be using whatever sales possible to get the game out there. I don't believe in being greedy. I don't believe like you have to make the most amount of money. If someone can't afford a game for $60, maybe they can afford it for 40. If they can't afford it for 40, maybe they can afford it for 20. I would much rather sell something to somebody for 20 than to not sell it at all and let them enjoy the game. So as many opportunities as I have to get the game into the hands of people, that's what I'm going to take. All right, marketing plan. So dev cycle marketing, while I'm making the game, is going to consist of utilizing social media to create a dev vlog and highlights to build a loyal community. That is this. This community is going to help drive the early metric of the Steam wish list. I'm going to be straight honest. I'm not making this video out of the goodness of my heart. Yes, I want to market things. And yes, I'm hoping if people watch this stuff that they like, they follow, they subscribe, and maybe become future customers. This community can also be useful in driving traffic to any potential Kickstarter, beta testing, or getting the word out in other ways. The use of a forum and Discord to foster communication in this community publicly in a way that will directly relate to the game. I don't know why I wrote it like that. All right, post-dev cycle, pre-release. So done with the game, but we haven't released it yet. The marketing is going to consist of submitting a playable demo to available platforms like, why did I write Twitch? This is not supposed to be Twitch. This is itch.io. Contacting journalists, giving out keys relevant to streamers, submitting the game into competitions and trade shows. Targeted ads might be purchased to drive traffic to the wish list shortly before. Oh my lord. No, wait, that's right. It throws me off when it cuts it off and puts it on the next line. Post-release marketing is going to consist of competitions or incentives, utilizing the channels which we've created for the games community. In short, I want to keep it simple. I think that people overcomplicate marketing. I think if you make a good product and you're good to people and you just get the word out and you build a community and you foster interest, uh, that's your marketing. I don't think you really have to do much more. So like these dev vlogs, I'm not going to be going crazy into them because I have to actually spend time making the game. But I don't see why if I'm making the game, I can't just hit the record button and then do a little voiceover and then post it on the YouTube. So and this is also meant to work in conjunction, right? If I make a community, then we can make more games in the future. We can do things with that community. So it's not just about building a community to support the game, but rather it's about building the game so that we have something to put out there to make content to create a community. Creating the community to me is just as important, if not more so, than the game itself. Marketing channels, kind of like the big ones here. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm not really going to go into milestones. These are just like a rough estimate. I've given myself 2 years to do the full development, and I will readjust as needed because I'm going to take as long as it takes to get the game out in the state that I want it to be out, rather than a buggy mess. All right, initial gameplay and bug testing is going to be done in-house. A limited beta release will be used by giving a limited build to trusted active community members. This is going to reward community engagement and build rapport with the players while providing needed resources to the dev team and getting the buzz about the game out into the public. I'm just one person. I can't bug test everything. I can't play every scenario to figure out exactly where things are breaking. So I make it as bug-free as possible, get it out there into the hands of the community, and listen for feedback and do rapid updates. Budget, there's going to be zero budget. I'm poor. I'm a broke EMT. I have no money. But here is my estimated total costs. A forum, a couple $100 a year. Steam page, I believe, is still $100. Epic Store is $100. Assets, I put 1,000 just to kind of be like, maybe I'll buy some assets if it cuts down on development time. But at the end of the day, my biggest resource is going to be my time and energy that I can put into the game. A team, just the kind of typical people that might be involved. This is just a description of what I am going to be needing as far as working with. We don't really have a team right now, but I am open to having one at some point as I start getting a prototype out there and I can find people that are, worth working with, who are willing to put the work in. This is important to me. So like, what qualifications am I looking for in team members? Experience and qualifications are important. But in my opinion, passion is invaluable. So if someone is willing to work hard as part of a team, there'll be a role for you. Like maybe even if it's just like a Discord mod or something like that, there'll be a role if someone is passionate. Because I believe anything can be learned, right? Even like the coding, like my first game, I joined a game jam with almost like I was still trying to learn Godot, and I had like a couple of buggy quarter games that just it was a mess. The code was a mess, nothing worked. And I joined a game jam with the idea that I was going to be working with people who are more experienced than me and maybe I could learn. That's not how it really worked. I ended up doing like 90% of the coding and we made a decent little game. It was, why am I trying to blank? It's Cauldron of Chaos. It was a little game where you play as a witch and you shoot things. And it's kind of buggy. It's not a great game. It's definitely got a lot of stuff I would like to improve on if I have time to do it. But for it being like the first game that I made, and I did like 90% of the coding for the game, I learned by doing. And so if I find the right people who are willing to learn, who are willing to put the work in, I'm willing to work with people. It's just a matter if you find the right people. Communication plan. Everything is going through Discord, but I use Notion to assign tasks and to create like project timelines and stuff like that. I find Notion is really useful. This is Notion right here. Everything I'm doing right now is in Notion. But live communication, that's what Discord is for. And that is about it. That's the game design document. And I'm still working on Sims. I guess I'll jump into the flow chart that I made. Let's see here. I believe I put it under here. We have a code flow diagram here, and let's just do it this way. This is kind of like an initial idea of how I believe the code is going to flow. And like there's definitely going to be a lot more code than this. This is just like something I came up with while I was at work. I had some downtime. Essentially, we're going to have like your core nodes, signal bus, which communicates with pretty much everything so that it stops all that spaghetti code. But the key thing is going to be we have your army, and I can't read this stuff because it's so small. Uh, wow, when I screenshot, I need to get like actual. I did this on iPad. I need to use like what's Lucid Chart or something like that. But essentially, you have your army, you have your resources for the army, which is essentially going to be like your squads, and then your squads. Each squad resources is going to have like a list of characters, and so then you'll have your character, which in turn has its own resources, which would be like its traits and its health and its stats, and it's going to have a 3D model, the health components to make the character have health and hurt boxes and hit boxes. Is what all this stuff is, and that character is going to just essentially be added to a list of resources. So I can imagine how it works. The idea is that when you get into a battle, it's going to like check, okay, I am the army. I'm going to have a resource of what squads I have. And then that in turn has a resource of what characters are in each squad. And then it's going to essentially instantiate those characters into battle as part of those squads. Here I have the idea of like we'll have a scene manager which controls whatever level we're on, which is either going to be a world map or like a battle map, and then that means I have to work on tiles. So this is it's kind of like a rough overview, but this is what I believe the code base is going to look like initially, and this is of course subject to change. I have like an AI manager up here, but I have no clue because I haven't worked with AI before. So where that's going to fit in or how it's going to communicate, I have no clue. But I know it's going to be there in some fashion or another. So that is it. That's essentially the overview of my plans for the game, and I'm going to be putting out more content as I develop it. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll get out some more updates soon.